Shalom and warm welcome to the Middle East Report. Today we have a very exclusive interview, one man's journey from witchcraft to Christianity to standing up and supporting Israel, and this is his remarkable story. Warm welcome to the program, and today's special guest is all the way from Hampshire. His name is Reverend Chris Wickland from the Living Word Church in Fenham in Hampshire. So Chris, warm welcome to the program. I think I have two people to thank for you being on today's show. Firstly, my good friend Stephen Jaffe, who very much recommended that you should come on the program. And of course, you're also very close friends with Richard Kent as well, and you've done a few programs. So you're not new to Revelation TV.
No, I've been around a few times, but thank you for inviting me onto the show. I really appreciate it. And it's a great honour to be here. No,
it's a pleasure. And also I've got to thank Steve Jaffe as well, who's a great guy for recommending you as well, and he's a regular on the Middle East Report. You've got an extraordinary and inspirational story to tell from witchcraft to Christianity, and really for standing up for Israel and the Jewish people and having a prophetic understanding of the end times in which we're living in. But do you want to start with how your journey began? Share with us your childhood, growing up in Scotland, your father's job with the Royal Navy that meant that your family were based just outside of Glasgow. So just unpack your quite inspirational story, because it's going to touch a lot of our viewers today.
Yeah. So when so I'm like 52 now. So this happened way back in the 70s. So I was born in 1972. Sorry, I'm 51. So I was born in 1972. And at that time in Scotland and Wales, there was all kinds of strange things going on, like with UFOs and stuff. So there was a real hotbed of things going on at that particular time, and I kind of got born into that time. And so as a young child, I remember we were living in marriage quarters. This was in Scotland, and my dad was in the Navy. He was a submariner, so he was at Faslane, I believe, and so he would often go off to sea for long periods of time. And I remember one particular night, we were coming back from somewhere, and I'm not sure if it was late at night or early in the morning, but I remember just looking up at the sky one particular night and then just having a sense that I was being watched, but I couldn't really describe it, but it was a sinister feeling. And I saw this kind of red light in the sky just kind of following us wherever we were going, and didn't really think much of it really at the time. And then from that time onward, these weird things used to keep happening to me every night. So every night when I'd go to sleep, I'd hear this kind of like banging noise that would get louder and louder, and then it would come into my room, and something would appear in my room and start moving towards me. And being a child, it'd freak you out. So what do? You hide under the covers, and I'd hide under the covers, and it would go away. And this wasn't all in my imagination, because there was a time where it happened like in the afternoon. I remember calling my mum upstairs, and she could hear it. She could hear this noise getting louder and louder, and then it went away again. And so that kind of like was my earliest childhood memories. So I'm going to say some things now which your viewers may or may not appreciate, but this is kind of what happened. So my mum and my dad's side of the family, they all lived in Wales. So during the summer holidays and things, or they went early school, they would just drop me off down there, and I'd stay down there for several weeks while they went off and did some stuff, which I really enjoyed. That was great. And I remember at that time, again, you had what was known as the Welsh Triangle. So again, there was lots of UFO type stuff going on there. And I remember waking up one night after this dream and just looking around the room, and suddenly I heard this noise that I remember hearing when I was a kid that came up close to the house. And I remember being so terrified that I hid again under the covers, and I forgot all about it. So this is happening again now, and I remembered that I'd hid under the covers as a younger child. So by this time, I must have been about 12 now, and I had this understanding or growing interest in psychology and things like that to understand, well, what is this, my mind? What's going on here? So I thought, I'm going to sit up and face whatever this is. And this noise, it got louder and louder and louder to the point where the windows started rattling. And by that time, I knew it wasn't my imagination, it wasn't my mind. And then I remember suddenly this paralysis came over me and I started to panic. And as I tried to panic, I couldn't move. And then this eye was suddenly shut and my head was forced against the wall, and I could almost hear this thought saying, you're not supposed to see what's happening. And I could see these pulsing lights reflecting off the wall and stuff. And I kept trying to cry out and scream, and I couldn't do anything. And then there was a sudden sound of an explosion, the sound of jets roaring past the house, and then I was completely free of this paralysis. And after that time, things got even worse. You know, every night I'd have something coming into my room, and it would press me down into the bed and stuff to let me know that whatever it was there. And I'd have these strange things wherever I would go. I'd get lights in the sky following me and all the kind of stuff like that. So with that as my kind of introduction to life as a young guy, it really screwed me up, if I'm honest with you, as a child, because I was going through all this stuff, but no one else was experiencing these things. And I couldn't tell my parents, you know, and I remember having to go and see a psychiatrist at school because my behaviour became so bad, because I just thought, well, whatever it is that's happening to me, there's something more to life than just, you know, maths and science and things like that. I knew there was another dimension to life, which I recognise now as a spiritual one. And I was desperately trying to figure out what this was. And so I was really quite rebellious towards authority, because it's like, well, who do you think you are to tell me? Because I know there's something bigger and something greater going on here that you have no understanding of. So, you know, so as a child I had behaviour problems and things. And because of all of these experiences, it just really made me question, what is the meaning of life? Why am I here? What is the purpose to my existence? So this was, you know, when I was about 12, I was thinking these kind of questions, which most 12-year-olds don't think about. They just like go out and play some football and have a laugh with their friends. I didn't have those kind of thoughts, unfortunately. And so then that slowly but surely led me into things like studying the occult. And then I joined a cult called the Rosicrucians. And then I eventually got into full-blown witchcraft and was doing all kinds of things, curses and all sorts of stuff. Things I'm really, if I'm honest with you, I'm quite ashamed of when I think back on it. And I don't particularly want to go into that so much. But and then things were just getting darker and darker. And it was getting so bad that I was getting open visions with demons were coming to me and telling me. One demon one day said to me, he said, you are going to die. We've deemed it that you are going to die. And I was quite defiant. I was like, I'm not going to die. I'm not going to die. And they're like, you are. And they gave me a vision of where it would happen. They didn't tell me when, but where it would happen. And then the vision ended. So I was like, okay, fair enough. And then several weeks later, I was, you know, going into the local wood to do some more witchcraft ritual type stuff. And as I was coming out of the woods, this voice spoke to me clear as day. Now, just back this up a bit, because obviously God is always intervening, even if you're not aware of it. And I do remember just before this major event happened, there was another event just prior to this where I was, again, not in a good way. I was taking like aerosol gas, you know, just to like knock myself out and stuff. And I remember coming round from a really bad trip, and then in my bedroom was the devil and there was God. And they were arguing about who could have my soul. And I couldn't look upon God. He was so holy, he was so pure, and he was like just this big sea. It looked like a universe just spinning around. So he had no direct form as such then. And the devil was over there. I could look at him, but I just couldn't look. It physically hurt to look upon God. I just couldn't do it. And they were having an argument about, well, it wasn't an argument, but they were having a discussion about who could have my soul. And I kind of just forgot about that. And so then a little bit later, then I'm coming back out of the woods from doing this witchcraft ritual. And then suddenly this voice speaks to me. And I can't describe it. You know, the Bible says his voice is like the sound of many rushing waters. I can't describe how it sounded. It made everything within me resonate and react in a way that I can't describe. It was like everything within me was tuned to that voice that I'd never heard before, but somehow I did know that voice from somewhere else before. I can't describe it. And it was just this wonderful voice. And in the instant that he spoke to me, I knew that it was Jesus. I knew that he was the creator of everything, and I knew that he was God. Okay, so I've had no religious upbringing. In the instant that he spoke, that was my instant revelation from that. And he said to me, look, stop what you're doing, come to know me, you can be forgiven for this in respect to the witchcraft. But I didn't really understand what he meant. And because I'd had these kind of visions before where, you know, I had demonic creatures coming and appearing to me, I just thought, well, this is new, but nothing that unusual. So I just ignored it. And a week later, again, I was doing something to do with witchcraft, and it happened again. He came to me again and said, please stop what you're doing. Come to know me. You can be forgiven for this. And again, I'm like, I don't really know what you mean. And you don't ignore God 3 times, okay? So God's very patient with me. So about a week later, again, I was doing something with witchcraft. And this time I was slapped hard across each side of my face. And I didn't feel the pain of it, but the blow of it, which really startled me. And he shouted at me saying, will you please stop what you're doing? Come to know me. You can be forgiven for this. And I was like, well, I think must be what I'm doing is wrong somehow. So I got on my knees and I said, I'm sorry. But then the next day I was back to my usual tricks again. And then a 4th week later, this girl I knew from school, she came up to me and she said, hey Chris, do you want to come along to church on Sunday? And I said, yeah, you know what, your Christian God keeps bothering me. I want to see what this is all about. And it was there I went along to this church. It was a Church of England church. And afterwards I was invited to go to their youth group. And because I was very aware of spiritual things, this was what really I found fascinating, was that I was sat in this room with all these Christians, and I could sense this mighty force in the middle of the room, which I now recognize as the person of the Holy Spirit. But then I didn't understand that. And I saw this force, and all these Christians were connected into it. But the thing that blew my mind was that they didn't even know what they were connected to. They just had no understanding of what it was. And I was like, what is this? Who are these people? What is going on here? So I just carried on going along to these like Sunday night cipher meetings. You know, it was a Church of England thing. And it was there I got the full gospel, and it was there I kind of gave my life to Jesus, and that's pretty much how I then became a Christian.
Amazing. That's such an incredible testimony. But for anyone that's watching the program that's actually been involved in the occult, or those that are kind of tempted into watching kind of Harry Potter films or reading the Harry Potter books, how vital is it for Christians to stay well clear of the occult? Yeah, because sadly we've seen so much occultic penetration even in our churches today.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, thanks to Hollywood, they've normalized a lot of the occult as, it's in cartoons and it's everything. It's just like, well, you know, that's just everyday life. But it is very dangerous. And excuse me. And if you speak to people about this stuff, they think you're mad. Like, no, it's all harmless stuff. It really isn't harmless. Excuse me. So the things that got me into witchcraft were sort of sword and sorcery type novels, like David Eddings and things like that. And so for people reading things like Harry Potter and stuff, it is dangerous. And I remember when the first Harry Potter movie first came out, I remember doing a little Google search or Netscape or whatever they called it back in those days, a Netscape search on the Harry Potter movie. And I found this witchcraft site, and I went onto it, and they were saying how it was really great PR for them. It's a great introduction to witchcraft, and it's a great recruiting thing. So witches quite clearly saw this as a really positive thing, you know. But Christians are like, oh, you know, I don't mind my kids watching it. It's okay. It's not that bad. So I actually watched the first one just to see how bad it is. And you might think, well, isn't that hypocritical? But I wanted to see just how bad it was. And by the time I got halfway through the film, I mean, it was like a horror film. It was, you know. And some people might laugh at me and go, it was not horrific, but that just shows how desensitized some people have begotten to this stuff. And like, we're showing this stuff to kids, you know, which is terrible.
Of course, can you share as well the impact and the psychological impact that being involved in the occult had on you growing up as a teenager as well?
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes we have to spell out not only the dangers of it, but also the personal impact of it. That anyone who's attracted into the occult thinks it gives them power, thinks it gives them influence. Mm-hmm. They can start to see a bit of the supernatural and play around with the supernatural. But it does come at a huge price, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, you get what it offers on the tin. You will get power and all that kind of stuff. But what they don't tell you is, I mean, it's the old banjo songs, you know, all the old blues players that sold their soul to the devil to become a great blues guitarist. It is like that. You want to do that stuff, you are selling your soul, and there's a deep cost in that. You are opening yourself up to the demonic, and the demonic realm is very real. And you'll just have these things that will come into you and will oppress you and will torment you. You'll have mental health issues. You know, you'll hear voices. You'll have all sorts of stuff, and it's brutal. So on me, you know, I just got to a place where I just wanted to kill myself all the time. And even after I became a Christian, you know, I still had a lot of baggage from the occult, and I had a lot of demonic things still going on. It took a lot of work to clean that up off me. But I mean, just give you an example of just how bad it got, you know, and God had to intervene. There was one time where I was like, that's it. I can't cope with this anymore. These dark depressions. I'd be fine 1 minute, and suddenly I feel this dark cloud come over me, and I'd just be like, I become another person. I'm like, I'm going to kill myself. I just got to kill myself. No logical rhyme or reason for it, you know. And it was like there was no reason for me to be depressed even. Nothing was that bad. And I remember one night thinking, right, that's it. I'm going to end my life. And I got into my car and I drove up to a place called Portsdown Hill, and there's like a big drop off the main road. And I thought, right, turned the car around, found a good place to drive off the edge, got up to 60 odd miles an hour, which was quite an achievement in a minivan, to be fair. and as I came towards the end of the road and pulled it off, I remember shutting my eyes, holding the steering wheel, waiting for pain to come and death. And the car went straight off the edge of the cliff. And then instantly the car filled up with this humongous bright white light from behind me. And I remember as my eyes were shut, I could see through my eyelids, you know, the outline of the car and everything. And then this amazing peace came over me, and then I blacked out. And then when I came to, the car had crashed onto its roof, and I was completely unhurt, which I was really mad about. I was like, man, I can't even succeed at killing myself. And I got out of the car, and again, the audible voice of God says, you're not dying because you've got work to do. I was like, oh, great. And then I clambered up the hill, and when I got to the top of the hill, the cheesy bit now, this white car pulls up, and the door opens, and I don't remember opening it, but anyway, the door opens, and I look in, there's this old bearded white guy in there, old white bearded guy, sorry, and he says, do you want to lift home? And I said, yes, please. And I got in the car, I didn't tell him where I lived or anything, and it all kind of went really vague, and the next thing I knew, he just drove me home, and, you know, so I know that night I had an encounter with an angel, but it was after that night, I then had to get some serious prayer ministry. And I had, you know, I went for some deliverance ministry, got things kicked out of me, and various other things, and I've been absolutely fine ever since. But you know, if you get involved in the occult, there is a heavy price to pay.
Also, share something that your teachers and your friends that you described in a recent video that I listened to on YouTube about how one of your teachers thought that you'd make the news and be in the news, but this time for kind of murder, and your friends as well around you and your colleagues at school also thought that you were an extremely dark person as well. Yeah. Share a little bit more on that, can you?
Yeah. So you know, at school, people literally feared me because I didn't know they did, but they did. Because they just said I was so dark, you know. I don't know, I really was in a dark place. I remember writing a diary and reading it once of what my life was like back then, and it was just so dark, you know. I can't believe that I was that depressed and that angry about everything. And I remember, you know, meeting one of my teachers after I became a Christian. And she said, and I can't remember what I did, but I was in the papers for something. And she said, you know what, I always knew you'd make it into the papers. She said, personally, I thought it'd be for murder. I was like, well, really? She said, yeah, really. She said, but, you know, it's really good what you're doing. And I had people literally come up to me saying, you know, they hadn't seen me for years, and they just see me queuing in a shop or something. They just come up to me and say, man, you've changed. I don't know what's happened to you, but you have changed. You know, because they literally saw the difference. There was one night where I was walking home, again after I became a Christian, and there was some friends from school were out by the local spa. It was quite late at night, and they were just all zonked out. I think some were drunk, some were high. And as I walked past, they sort of went, Chris, is that you? And I was like, yeah. And they went, man, what's happened to you? You used to have like this dark cloud all around you. Now you seem to be glowing. What's happened in your life? What have you done? So I was like, well, I just quickly told them I'd become a Christian and just kind of left them to it. So people noticed the difference, even without me having to say anything. That's how different it was that Christ had made that kind of difference in my life. That, you know, and it was revealing to me just how dark I must have been for people to actually notice.
And share with us as well, I mean, when you became a Christian, I think you told me on the phone a couple of days ago that you were told to read the Gospel of Mark, but instead you turned to the book of Romans. Yes, and from there, the Lord unpacked Romans 9, 10, 11 for you about God's plans and purpose for Israel and the Jewish people. So just share with us that remarkable story.
So after I got saved in the Church of England church, the Reverend said to me, right, what you need to do now, he says, now you got saved, well done, congratulations, but you need to go home and just read something nice and light, nice and easy. So I recommend you read the Gospel of Mark. It's quick, it's punchy, gives you an introduction to Jesus and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, being the kind of person that I am, I went home and thought, oh, I'll read the book of Romans instead. And so I had no theological background, I had no bias either way. And so at the age of 17, my first reading of Romans, to me, it made sense. Justification by faith in Christ and all that kind of stuff. And then when I got to chapters, you say 9, 10, 11, it seemed perfectly clear to me and obvious that God had not finished with Israel, that God had a plan for Israel, and he was continuing on that plan, and that there was a plan for the church, and somehow they would weave together at the end of the age where, you know, all Israel would be saved and would all come back together again. And that just seemed completely obvious to me. I was like, okay. So right from day one of my, I guess, when I started reading the Bible, I just got a heart for Israel straight away. Now, of course, when you're 17 and in the Church of England church, there's no real out for that. Not that there was anything wrong with the C of E church, it was just back then in that particular church, there was no one that I knew. No,
I don't think there's probably anyone very much in the evangelical circles that for your age, you're a couple of years older than me, that had a love and understanding of God's plans and purposes for Israel and the Jewish people. I don't think it was there.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. And it was only just through, you know, God and his graciousness ended up enabling me just to bump into some people, and then I kind of, me and my wife to be that back then, we went round there for dinner, and we found out that this person was about to marry a Messianic Jew and all this kind of stuff, and I was like, what is this? You know, and he explained it, and I could just feel my heart burning, like there's something here. And that kind of started to open my eyes to, you know, more from just a theological construct to, oh, actually, this is a real thing. And just grew and grew, and to the point where I just knew that I had to get to Israel. So I remember I felt very strongly that God was saying to me when I was about 20, 21, God said to me, I think I was 20, he said to me, I want you to go to Israel. He didn't say it vocally, he just said it internally. I want you to go to Israel. And I was like, but I can't afford to go to Israel. It costs loads of money. And about a week later, I got a tax rebate, and boom, I had all the money I needed. So booked the tickets, and I met this lady, and she said, I got some friends out there, you can go stay with them. And so at the age of 21, I went to Israel for the first time, and they were tour guides as well, so they just took me to all the places, and there I just kind of fell in love with Israel and fell in love with the Jewish people in a way that doesn't make sense, but does make sense. You know, I just got it. I must admit, I don't struggle with it, but I do find it odd where you get a lot of Christians are quite hostile towards the whole Israel thing. And it's like, but I don't understand why, because it's so clear, you know, in the scriptures. You know, there's a third of Old Testament prophecy still hasn't been fulfilled yet. And you look at the book of Revelation from chapter 4 onwards, it's pretty much mostly about Israel. And so it's like, you know, it's quite clear that God hasn't done with Israel. God has got a plan for Israel and stuff. And so, yeah, so at a very early age, at the age of 17, I just got the Israel bug, and I just got a love for the Jewish people.
Amazing. And how did you get involved? How did the Lord get you involved in ministry, and how did then you became a kind of reverend, and then heading up your own church as well?
So I went off to music college and studied at Guitar Institute in London, and I wanted to be a rock star for Jesus. I wanted to be the next Matt Smith or whatever, and so I trained hard at that, and I tried to push through all of those doors. I had friends, and they were breaking into the music industry in really wonderful ways, and I was just like constantly hitting this brick wall. And I was constantly like, when am I going to be famous? That was the thing that was driving me back in those days. And then, when did it start? Probably when I was about 39. We joined this church called Living Word, and I remember the pastor saying to me, he said, I really believe God's called you to leadership. And as he said, I just remember this cold shiver going down my spine. That, like, no, that's the last thing that I'm looking for. I don't want that. But then it just wouldn't leave me. It just kept going around. And then I just got this really strong sense. And then my wife and I, we started getting dreams that we were to plant a church. And it was like, oh, I don't want to do this. I've trained so hard to be a musician, and now I've got to do this. So it wasn't something that we willingly were like really excited about doing. It was actually something we really didn't want to do. But we love God, we want to be obedient. So we kind of started out. So the leadership at Living Word, we said, look, we feel God is saying we got to plant a church. And they said, yeah, go for it. Just do it in our name. We'll keep an eye on you, see how you're getting on. So we started something in Fareham, and we started it in a house, because I thought that's how you start it. And within a week of that, again, we had a dream, both me and my wife, saying, get out of the house, get a building so people know you're there. And so we did that. And the first 4.5 years were the worst 4.5 years of my Christian life, bar none. They were awful. Anything that could go wrong, I shouldn't say this, but any crazy person that would come in to try and take things over and do all that, we had it all. I remember one pastor guy saying to me, he said, man, you've experienced more in 3 years than I have in 30 years of ministry. So it was really tough. But then in time, the guy that was running the original Living Word plant, he wanted to wanted us to sort of take over that congregation, which we did. And then we just started planting some others, and just kind of went from there, really. And now God's really blessed us, established us, and so here we are 12 years later. A lot wiser. Yeah, if you want to be a pastor of a church, I don't know, think long and hard before.
I think you have to be called. I think you have to be called, without a doubt. But being a pastor and coming from your kind of occultic background also probably gave you a huge head start, didn't it? Because primarily because you're looking at the world in a kind of three-dimensional way. Yeah. You're realizing there's the physical, and then behind that is the spiritual. And as you were saying before in the earlier part of the interview, not many Christians are kind of aware of that invisible war that is constantly being waged around us. What does that give you in terms of shepherding the church and the significance of good Bible solid teaching as well, and particularly when it comes to Israel, understanding the spiritual dynamics of it all?
Yeah, so because I've had what I would call very kind of charismatic experiences in God, one of the things that I felt that was really important is that I don't become a floaty, flighty charismatic without any real grounding. I know I sound like I'm being rude to people. I'm not being rude to people. I'm just saying I just felt that with those extreme experiences, I've got to be tethered by real hardcore theology and Bible knowledge. And so when I became a church leader, I really knew that I had to really get into the Word on a whole nother level. And just really studying it and learning doctrine. So I did things like London Bible College, studied Old Testament theology and things. And all that's really helped, gave me a good structure, a good framework. I think for being a church leader, you do see that there's another side to things. And we were having things happening to us, which probably other churches didn't have happen to them. And some quite distressing things. We had one member of our church where literally a demon came to her one night and grabbed her out of the bed, dragged her across the floor and said, you'll be dead in 7 months. And she was. And we had all kinds of stuff like that going on. And that was right at the beginning. So because we understood things like that, it was almost like we were getting attacked on a whole nother level. But we come through that, fortunately, praise God. That was really tough. And so as a pastor, I'm constantly aware of what's going on, but I'm trying to make sure that Christians are well grounded in the Word and not out into goofy experiences or things like that. What else? And also, we're one of the only few churches in the whole area that either A, support Israel, and B, know how to deal with people who do have a lot of maybe demonic problems and stuff. I mean, not everyone's got demons, but occasionally it comes up, and we're one of the few churches that deal with that. We're one of the few churches that do, proper inner healing and all that kind of stuff as well. So having that spiritual background, but not just having that side of the dark side from witchcraft, but also I'm really expectant to see God do amazing, wonderful things as well. Because if that's the power of the dark side, man, I know that God is far immeasurably above anything we ever dare think or ask or imagine, by His power that is within us. So, yeah. Yeah.
Amen to that, definitely. And how did you take your support for Israel from praying for Israel to probably giving the odd sermons about Israel to then actually transition then and actually become active and become an advocate for Israel? Share with us how your nights to honour Israel started, how you met up, and the key person in that was our good friend, a mutual friend, Stephen Jaffe.
Yeah. So you say it all began with a dream, right? So I don't know how long ago I had this dream, but in this dream I was an old man. I was in my 90s. And I was being interviewed by someone, and sat here next to me was my ex-wife. And I don't have an ex-wife, okay, but she was fully Jewish, and I, as I am now, fully Christian. She wasn't Messianic Jewish, she was just fully Jewish. And we were divorced from each other, and I remember wearing dark glasses, and I just didn't want to be on the same stage as this woman. But she asked me a question, and it had to do with Israel, and she said, "Chris, will you just tell them?" And I wouldn't say anything because I was angry at her. And then the dream ended, and I woke up like, what on earth was that about? And then just the Lord spoke so clearly. He said, "My church and Israel are divorced from each other, and I hate divorce." And then that was it. And so I didn't really think much of it after that. I was like, okay, excuse me. And then about a few years later, I was in the shower one day. It's just like God likes to speak to him in the shower. And then that vision, that dream came back to me, and God said, "Now's the time to work with that." And he showed me that from the dream, it was Christians and Jews working together, and like a marriage, it's going to be awkward, it's going to be difficult. Sometimes you're going to be like pulling your hair out, going, what, oh, how's this ever going to work? We're so different from each other, because actually we are very different from each other in certain respects and very close in others. So I was like, how's this going to work? And then I just had this idea, because what happened just prior to that, me in the shower there, I'd come back from Faith Camp, and at Faith Camp, which is run by Kingdom Faith, they had on a Sunday, they'd invited Stephen Jaffe to come in, and he was speaking to an auditorium. There must have been about 4,500 people there, and he brought an Israeli diplomat with him as well. And he just got up and shared and spoke, and it crossed my mind when I was in the shower. I was like, right, if I've got to try and liaise somehow, make an interface with the Jewish community, well, he's got to be the guy that can do it. And I wonder if we can do what Kingdom Faith did with him, but on a much smaller scale. So I don't quite remember how I managed to get hold of him, but I think it must have been through Facebook, and I just messaged him and stuff, and he said, yeah, let's meet up. So I went to near where he lives. Is it London, Camden?
Yeah, North London, yeah.
So I met him there, and we kind of like went out for lunch and things, and just had a good conversation. I think we just hit it off. And then from there, he just started opening up these opportunities. So he said, hey, what we'll do is we need to put on Israel night. And I was like, okay. And then he just kept phoning up, saying, yeah, I've got these guys for you, I've got diplomats from the embassy for you. And within 7 weeks, we had this really great event. And it was the first one we'd ever put on. And we had about that first one, bear in mind where we are in Fareham, which is the Southampton Fareham area is the hotbed for replacement theology. So we got about 168, 170 people that came for that first event. And then after that, we just, for the next several years, kept putting on Israel events to educate, really, because there was a lot of anti-Semitism growing over those years, especially with Corbyn, becoming more of a seeming threat with what he was pushing through. So that kind of just grew from there, really. And I did things like, I wrote a book called The Biblical Importance of Israel, which theologically looked from the Old Testament right through into the New Testament, how Israel is very relevant for today, and how God's still got a plan for Israel, and what that looks like for Christians and stuff like that. So, yeah.
No, that's superb, because it's so important also to show that practical love and demonstration, that practical love to the Jewish people and to the nation of Israel. And this is what this program's all about, really. So you're a perfect fit for the program. But Chris, when we look at the challenges facing Israel, and I suppose I've come to a realization that so many Christians say, look, God's given me a heart, he's given me a kind of revelation. And I think the issue of Israel does come through pretty much supernatural revelation of his love and purposes for Israel and the Jewish people, because after all, these are his chosen people, and they're close to his heart, and he doesn't reveal that just to anyone. But when you come to a theological understanding of Israel, that's the starting block, isn't it? It's not the finishing block. So it's a question of then educating the church to say, look, we have this theological understanding of where Israel fits into the plan of God. Therefore, that's the starting block to demonstrate that love to the Jewish people. And probably with your experiences as well, I found the most intimate times of experiencing God and his power is when able to bring a Jew and Gentile together. And God just absolutely wants to demonstrate his supernatural love and to remind his people that they are his people and they have a special plan and purpose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's real power in that connection. I remember I was at the Jerusalem prayer breakfast a couple of years ago, and they had an Arab Christian and a Jew on stage hugging each other. And just for the few seconds when I saw it, it really kind of messed with my head, because you're having these two polarities that are coming together and loving on each other, and they did a lot of work together. And it just, you know, just still now sends shivers down my spine. It was just like, that was such a powerful thing to witness, you know. It wasn't some fudgy ecumenical thing. These were two guys that genuinely loved each other, worked a lot with each other, and it's a real wonderful thing to see. And so, you know, for me as well, so we were, you know, I'm involved with like MDA and things like that, but it was still like, I still need to be connecting with real Jewish people at the end of the day. So I did things like I made friends with the superintendent of a local synagogue. His name is Michael Zephyr in the South Sea area. And he's a great guy, you know, just absolutely love him. You know, if you go around there for a cup of tea, you probably get like 2 words in edgeways, and he just talks and talks. But through things like that, just developing friendship with him, because when, as you know, when COVID came, all the big sort of Israel nights and things like that, they all just vanished overnight. And so it was like, well, how can we keep this going? Because obviously people aren't going to come to the events any time soon. So, for example, I'd meet up with Michael Zephyr every now and then Stephen Jaffe and I would just meet up every now and then, and we started then go to historical places and just keeping that friendship going and those connections going, which I think is really important. So if there's any way, you know, if there's viewers out there thinking, how can I, you know, practically serve Israel and stuff, well, you can just start like maybe getting to know some Jewish people, you know, they are around and about, and just starting showing kindness to them. We did an event at the beginning of this year with March for Life, is that what they're called? March for Life, yeah.
Yep.
And we had a second-generation Holocaust survivor come and talk. So she was the daughter, her mum was a Holocaust survivor. And what surprised me is she was genuinely touched by the fact that Christians actually had a love for the Jewish people and had a love for Israel, and that shocked her so much that she refused to allow us to pay for the hotel bill. She wanted to insist that she pay it for herself as a gift to us as a church, because of, you know, it really helped her to see the kindness of Christians towards her. So things like that, they speak volumes, and I think the Jewish community need to know that there are Christians out there who don't have any ulterior motives. I'm not trying to convert them or anything, but just come alongside them and be their friends, you know, because I think, you know, as Stephen Jaffe always says, they'll get the Saturday peoples first, and then they'll be after the Sunday people. We need to stand shoulder to shoulder with each other.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this March for Life that took place recently in Jerusalem and major capitals across Europe and also in the United States, to show solidarity with Israel and the Jewish people, to remember also the Shoah, to say never again.
It's so heartwarming to see our city filled with lovers of Jerusalem. Thank you for being here.
Christians from more than 30 nations around the world have gathered in Jerusalem to say, from the Holocaust to new life, Shalom, Shalom, Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
The founders of this march are essentially descendants of Nazis. And, you know, to have human beings coming and saying something so awful happened, we're going to spend our lives trying to correct and compensate for that, and to create a movement like that.
I am from a city in which the university is, where Nazi perpetrators, SS murderers, were educated and trained, and they were responsible for the death of 700,000 Jews, and that's why we started researching the history of our city.
March of Life founder Jobst Bittner says German families usually don't speak about their Nazi past.
We discovered that only once we're willing to actually speak the truth about the past, we'll be able to take responsibility both for the present and the future. And that's why we decided to give that call to the nations and to call hundreds of thousands to the streets to raise their voices against anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jews, and for Israel.
Bittner, like many in the march, has a personal story.
My own father was an officer in the Wehrmacht, the German army, and he was in France and in northern Africa. And as an officer of the Wehrmacht, he shared in that responsibility for the deportation of Jews, for the murder of Jews.
Now he sees their responsibility is to stand with Israel, especially in times of crisis.
Together with our Jewish friends, hand in hand, we want to walk and stand for Israel, and that's our theme, united to be a light.
Many of us found out that our fathers, great-grandfathers, they were Nazis, they were part of the Shoah, they were concentration camp guards, they were part of the Wehrmacht.
Heinz Roy's family shared a mixed past. While his Dutch great-grandmother hid Jews in her home, his German-Austrian great-grandfather took a different path.
Because he was part of the Lutheran church that was not supporting Hitler, so I thought, okay, everything was okay. But then I started to read his diaries and his letters. And what I found out is that he withdrew from his Jewish friends at that time. So he didn't speak up. He just didn't want to have anything to do with that. And that's the problem, because at that time, people who knew better didn't do anything.
The March of Life began as a movement of repentance.
We realized that the same silence towards the Jewish people, it's also in our own hearts. And in 2007, we learned that there were 8 concentration camps around our little town of Tübingen in southern Germany. And there were death marches at the end of the war towards Dachau. And then we had the impression, and actually a word from the Lord, to say, why not do a March of Life on these trails of the death march?
They walked 300 kilometers, retracing the steps along those different routes over 3 days.
And we had reconciliation meetings in the middle of it, and beautiful encounters between the descendants of the Nazis and the Holocaust survivors and the descendants of Holocaust survivors.
What they initially saw as a one-time event is now worldwide. Marches have been held in hundreds of cities through 25 countries. In the U.S., it's called the March of Remembrance. Ahead of the Jerusalem event, President Isaac Herzog commended the group for its courage in facing their dark past. He wrote, "Your presence demonstrates unwavering moral support for our nation state and its people, and the state of Israel welcomes you with open arms."
Well, I know that my grandfathers were part of the army. I don't know much about it, but they were part of the system. I'm happy that I could be a part of this movement, because I know in Germany most people say it's past, it's gone, but that's not true. It's part of our heritage.
I can take a stand for the past, the present and the future with being part of the march.
Global Zionist movement leader Yehuda Glick welcomed the marchers, saying he hopes to see many more visiting and standing with Israel in the future.
Now it's the time to raise the banner of God on the place that he chose in Zion. It's time for the nations, just like we, the Jewish people, took our destiny in our hands and came back home. Now the nations have to stand up for Zion and make sure Zion is a house of prayer for all nations.
In a powerful show of support less than 80 years after the Holocaust, the March of Life sang the Aaronic blessing over the Jewish people and Israel. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
There we have March for Life, which is extremely powerful. Christians visiting the Nazi death camps such as Auschwitz-Birkenau and showing their solidarity with Israel and the Jewish people by saying never again. And it makes me think that if we just saw that very moving video and the horrors of the Second World War and the Nazi regime over 80 years ago, but we also have to unpack, don't we, the kind of occultic force that was actually behind the Nazis, because the Nazis and the SS were literally obsessed with the occult. They wanted firstly to destroy Judaism and its obsession with killing and murdering all of Europe's Jewish population wherever the Nazis took control. They even hunted down Jewish people, even though it wasn't in the interests of the war itself. So it was against their war aims. And of course, then we had members of the SS that were literally obsessed with the occult. Can you just, from your perspective, just unpack a bit of the ideology, Nazi ideology, and the occult behind this, and this Jew hatred that Satan absolutely hates the Jewish people?
Yeah, I mean the anti-Semitic spirit is like it is an antichrist spirit. There's no denying it. I mean, I remember when I used to be into the occult. I remember we walked past this house once where there was they put a Star of David in a house, so we knew they were Jewish, and I had such a hatred for them. And I was like, it didn't make any sense. There's no logical rhyme or reason. Why would I hate them? Never even met the people. They've never hurt me, but there was just that against them. And this was obviously when I was a witch. But there was no rhyme or reason for it. It's a spiritual thing. And so this whole anti-Semitic thing that we have today and things, whether people realize it or not, it is a spirit of Antichrist. It's an attitude of Antichrist, where you read, Revelation chapter 12, and it talks about how, the red dragon wants to go after the woman who gave birth to the child, the Messiah, and then also go after the children as well, which are the Christians. So, but the spirit of Antichrist wants to destroy the Jewish people. I mean, you've seen it right from the beginning of history, right through to current day. And unfortunately, I don't think it's ever going to leave until the Messiah returns. And it's the same with the whole SS thing. If you do any looking into the darker side of the SS, it's quite clearly that there was an occultic kind of connection going on there and the things that they got up to. There's loads of footage you can watch, some of the things that they got up to with the occult. But again, because they were going down that road, that Antichrist spirit, and also I think whether probably Hitler knew it or not, but he was a type of Antichrist. He was changing signs, he was changing the seasons. I mean, you look at the Maccabean revolt and Antiochus Epiphanes, and look at what he did, and you compare that to what Hitler did. It's very similar. Obviously on a much greater scale, but yeah, absolutely, that mixture of the occult and that Antichrist spirit is just 2 + 2 = 4 = anti-Semitism.
So do you think there's a correlation today that we are seeing almost record numbers of anti-Semitic instances or instance of Jew hatred that's on the same level in the 1930s with the rise of Nazism and fascism in Europe, with today what we're seeing in our society today, and this is this occult explosion?
Yes, yeah, and hyperliberalism as well, and all the baggage that comes with that. It seems, even Stephen Jaffe said this. He said he recognised that it was a spiritual thing because it seemed to be about the Bible at the end of the day. It was the Bible is the moral code for the world. Absolutely. But man doesn't want to have a moral code. He doesn't want to acknowledge that there is a God. In fact, I don't believe there's atheists. I believe they're God haters. People, they know God's real, but that's why they hate him so much, that they'll try and create a world and a society that's without him. And the more that we're pushing, and so therefore we want to change sexuality, we want to change gender, we want to change anything that has an imprint of the original design and anything to do with the Bible. And it's from their point of view, Jews, Christians, but more so Jews, again, they're the guys of the Bible and stuff. So, we hate the Bible. We hate everything the Bible stands for. We hate people that stand for the Bible. Therefore, we hate the Jews. And, it's quite clearly a spiritual thing. And the more liberal and progressive society is becoming, the more naturally, unfortunately, it tends to be anti-Semitic. I'm not saying that every liberal is anti-Semitic. No, I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that that kind of culture leads to it. And we see it in our colleges and universities, this complete liberalism and a complete whitewash and reinterpreting of history and just a lack of knowledge. People saying, oh, Israel's an apartheid state. And it's like, well, all you need to do is get on a plane, which is 4.5 hours away, and go to Israel and check it out. Because it is very cosmopolitan. You've got Arabs and Jews and Druze and Christians and all sorts of people and people around. It's just not like that at all. It's just complete nonsense. So dangerous times. And because it's being bred in universities as well, you see, if you can get the children, then you can win a generation. And so we're breeding anti-Semitism in our colleges, in universities. And I don't know how the government is actually allowing a lot of these places to get away with it. We know what happened in the Second World War, and we're seeing history starting to repeat itself again and again. It's interesting, just before the Second World War, the rise of interest in communism and stuff, and we have, because of our hyperliberalism in our society, we're going down that road, and you can see it in America as well. And I'm just seeing history repeating itself again. You think, I can see where this is going, especially with Europe and everything else, that all it's going to take is just one thing to kick us over the edge, and we could end up in a really nasty situation, and anti-Semitism just running riot, and Jew hatred again, because we're looking for someone to blame again and get them out of our countries. I can quite easily see where this is going.
Yeah, and if we read the kind of book of Revelation, particularly going through the tribulation period, and if you think that today in the West the most dominant ideology is secular humanism, we go from full-blown secular humanism to Satanism.
Yes, basically.
Nothing in between.
Yeah, no atheism at all.
And it's that worship of man, that man can do everything. Man is independent of God. Man can build whatever he wants and demonstrate his power and his authority on the earth by what he owns and what he has. And it's amazing how you can go from humanism to Satanism, essentially.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that you will see quite clearly in the book of Revelation. There's no atheism. They believe in a supernatural being, which obviously is the Antichrist and the spirit behind it. And it's quite clear that that's the way they go. But then we see this in Roman times as well. There was no atheism in Rome. In fact, Christians were considered atheists because they only believed in one God, where the one true God was the Roman emperor, which was the beast system. If you wanted to buy and trade and sell, then you had to be a part of a guild, which had to worship and do homage to the emperor and all that kind of stuff. So you can see how it started there, and just how the same old just keeps repeating throughout history and where we're going. And in that time, the sheer hatred for the Jewish people as well.
Absolutely. And then the other side of the coin, we see that Israel is just celebrated recently a 75th anniversary as a modern state rebuilt in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Well, we are literally seeing the fulfillment of a prophecy unfold before our eyes, and just did a program recently about how Israel now has 5 unblemished red heifers needed for the cleansing of the priests before they carry out temple worship. So we know that God is putting the jigsaw pieces, the prophetic jigsaw pieces together. And shouldn't this also remind Christians as well that we are living in extremely exciting times, that we're living in biblical times, that we are literally in our generation, our times, seeing things come into place that the world hasn't seen for over 2,000 years.
Yeah, that's right. But I would say, because of the theology that's in a lot of churches, they have no awareness that we are in end days time scenarios going on. So most churches are amillennial or post-millennial. So they just believe that Jesus will come back maybe at some time in the future, probably never in their lifetime or anything. And because of that mindset, they think there's no such thing as an antichrist, it's just an attitude. They don't believe the book of Revelation should be taken literally, even though it's 400 references to Old Testament prophecy, which compiles together to form the book of Revelation. They just don't understand, they don't see it. So because they don't see it, they're not aware of the signs of the times. When you've got things going on around the world at the moment where you get rivers, one day they're fine, next day they're completely blood red, and you've got all kinds of crazy stuff going on and signs in the heavens, it's actually the Christians that are poo-pooing it. It's, oh, no, it doesn't mean that and stuff like this. It seems that the unbelievers have more foresight that we're heading towards something dark. I've got unbelievers telling me that they said, there's something big that's coming. This feels like end of the world type stuff. I mean, the Christians are just, forgive me for saying this, but a lot of Christians are in la-la land when it comes to the signs of the times. And that's because of their amillennial theology, which has just completely blinded them to the signs of the times.
Absolutely. So when and how do we wake up the church regarding God's plans for Israel and the Jewish people and the prophetic times in which we're living in? Because without understanding that, you don't understand what God's doing in the world. You don't understand what's actually coming and to actually prepare yourself spiritually. I mean, literally since COVID-19 broke out, we've seen the building of the infrastructure for the Antichrist. We're not very far away from a digital currency and living in a cashless society. And John got that revelation on the island of Passos nearly 2,000 years ago. Yeah. And it's coming alive in our day.
Yeah, that's right. I think, unfortunately, the church will do what it always does. So traditionally in church history, when the church goes through a time of peace and contentment, she becomes fat and lazy and she becomes amillennial. And then when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, then the church becomes premillennial again, because she becomes a praying church and starts waking up thinking, oh gosh, this sounds like the end of the world type stuff. So there was a lot of Christians that started to wake up during COVID. There's a lot of unbelievers actually that started to wake up during COVID, and a lot of unbelievers became believers through that time as well, you know, by watching all these conspiracy videos. I'm not saying I condone it, but that it led them to that. And unfortunately, I think the church is we're gonna hit something pretty soon. I personally believe we're gonna hit massive economic troubles very soon. And when we do, it will be that will cause the church to pray again, and then she'll start to wake up to the signs of the times and have that sense of urgency. Because at this moment in time, the church has no sense of urgency about her. She's very complacent and apathetic.
Which is dangerous. It's a very dangerous place to be, particularly when we're seeing that we're living in a time where for over 200 years our Christian freedoms have been cherished, they've been kept by society, but now we see this fundamental attack on Christian values, on our Judeo-Christian heritage.
Absolutely, yeah.
And of course with it, mixed up in that is this spirit of Jew hatred as well. Yeah. And you know, we're seeing that we've got to stand, haven't we, in these last days. So as a pastor and our viewers watching, and maybe someone that has actually experienced the occult, how can they just experience kind of freedom in Christ, really, from a practical standpoint?
So are you saying if they're a Christian already, or?
Oh yeah, or someone is Christian already and they're suffering from occultic things, or,
okay, right,
or someone who's been watching, who's involved in the occult and has been drawn to this program today to know that there is a hope and there is salvation and there is forgiveness of sins, and that darkness can disappear.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is for those that aren't yet believers in Christ but are looking towards this and they're having occultic experiences. I just need to make it clear that actually Jesus really is the only one who can stop this. You know, I've come across many situations where people have literally burst into the church saying, I can't take this anymore. I've had these things literally crawling out of the walls coming to me. And because we just prayed for them, led them to Jesus, it stopped it. So the first thing, the most powerful thing you can do is give your life to Jesus. Why? Because you're coming out from the authority of the devil and you're coming under a new authority, which is the authority of God.
Chris, thank you so much for being my special guest. It's been a very special program, and really appreciate your input in the program. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me come in.
Pleasure. And I want to thank you for watching this program at home. We've heard Chris's incredible testimony of how God brought Chris out of darkness and into his glorious light. And part of that is standing with Israel and the Jewish people. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.